Bandada Hunzu. Can I have everybody say that with me this morning? Bandada Hunzu. Well done. That means good morning in my language of Dakath and Carrier. So good morning. Hari Suento Lesuzi Angel. Good morning. My name is Angel Ransom. I'm from the community of Nakazli Waten, which is about 2 hours west of Prince George, BC. And I currently reside in the Lheidli-T'enneh territory. Before I get started here today, I'd like to welcome you all to our session. My colleague Sarah and I are just having a casual chat here to share some updates, information, and have a conversation. We are going to open it up after our kind of formal conversation piece today to engage with our audience here. And so if you got a burning question or something you want to add or discuss, we welcome that near the end here. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge that we are on the territory of the Secwepemc people in the traditional territory of the Secwepemc and the Sekelteen, Skatchin, and Kwaut communities that reside within this area of what is called Sun Peaks here today. So I'd just like to acknowledge what peoples and lands we are on today, as it's important, not just as an acknowledgement piece, but to really honor the people whose lands we're here on, who we're sharing with, and to just really respect those traditions and cultures that are shared with us. So welcome to our session here today. And I think that was all I had to add for now. I guess I'll just a little bit of an introduction. Sorry, I'm a little bit nervous because you're all right there, but this is great. So my name is Angel Ransom. I've got 2 days left as a board member on the Planning Institute of BC's board. I've made a decision not to run again simply because my father was really sick and I'm just a really busy woman. Indigenous planners are in high demand. And so I really chose to prioritize my time in terms of work-life balance. And I really am pleased and honored to be on the Planning Practices for Reconciliation Committee since the inception of the committee. The work we're here to share and talk about today is of passion. It's part of who I am, what I do in my day-to-day work, and I just really wanted to prioritize my time and energy to this committee. And so I've decided not to run on the Planning Institute of BC's board this year, just to balance things out. But that's who I am. I'm from Nakazli Waten. I'm an environmental planner and UMBC alumni. I specialize in First Nations land use planning. And I've been doing this type of work for, I don't even know, 18 years now, maybe 15 years. But the type of planning I started doing was comprehensive community planning, because community health and well-being is at the forefront of all that I do as a planner. But I also took a real interest in understanding there's social needs, and with social needs, there needs to be an economy. And not only the social needs, but the climate needs around getting to net zero by 2050, and that needs major project development. And so now I'm working in this space as the Senior VP of Environmental Services for an organization called the First Nations Major Projects Coalition. And what I do there, my day-to-day work, is help First Nations build their capacity to do better environmental assessments of major projects. And we support the First Nations as proponents or as equity owners in the development of those projects that are looking to transition our energy sources off of dirty fuels into more renewable energy. And so I started at the community level, and I always take those perspectives and grassroots teachings and learnings up to these higher levels that I work in today to really advocate for partnerships, economic reconciliation, as well as better protection of environmental assessments, and ensuring that communities and people have cultural spaces that they can utilize regardless of development happening with the territories. So I bring a lot of experience to the committee as an Indigenous woman, but also as an Indigenous planner working in the space of planning around major projects within traditional territories to get to zero by 2050. So it's a little bit about who I am and what I do. And I work nationally in scale, sometimes internationally, which is great. I'm in the middle of creating a cultural rights assessment toolkit, which I will be showcasing in Dublin, Ireland next year at the International Association of Impact Assessment, and really moving and shaking and trying to change policy and legislation in the Canadian realm of all that I do. So a little bit about myself. I can go on, but it's not about me, so I'll shut up. No, just kidding. But over to you, Sarah. Thank you.
Thanks, Angel. I'm chair of the Planning Practice and Reconciliation Committee, and I don't do anything as interesting as Angel, but I have a development consulting company delivering affordable and supportive housing across British Columbia. So just a little bit about the format of today's chat. I'm going to start off just giving everybody, I just don't know how familiar everybody is with the PPRC. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of our last 3 years as a committee together. And then I'm going to hand it back over to Angel, who's going to chat with us a little bit about, we're calling today's conversation a fireside chat, and Angel's going to give you a little perspective on what that means to her. And then Angel's going to ask me some questions, and I'm going to ask Angel some questions, and then you guys are going to get involved. So get ready. It's you're in for a ride here. Okay, so for those who aren't familiar, we're just going to give an overview, like I said. So the PIBC board appointed the Indigenous Planning Working Group in 2020. And the mandate at the time was, I'm going to read this because it's really changed, to develop and recommend relevant and achievable strategies and actions for PIBC to respond to outcomes from the Truth and Reconciliation Report and the Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women and Girls Report. But we've changed our scope completely. We're now the Planning Practice and Reconciliation Committee. So the first thing we really need to do is just acknowledge again that we were never an Indigenous Planning Working Group. Angel is our only Indigenous representative on the working group. So we changed our name to Planning Practice and Reconciliation Committee. We apologize for any harm that caused to Indigenous planners and other Indigenous people. It was never the intent. And we made a big mistake, and we're very regretful of that. Unfortunately, it's one of the many mistakes that we're going to probably make on our journey. We have spent 3 years doing nothing but listening and learning from Indigenous guest speakers, from each other, and from research that we have all done and presented. So I think that's to also say, you know, we're always learning, listening, growing, and we're open to anybody's feedback and suggestions that they have for the committee moving forward. And we are open to changing what we're doing. And we deeply hope that as we continue the work amongst our committee, that our mistakes will diminish in correlation with our decolonization efforts. So as acknowledged above, you know, we are going through this learning process, and it has been quite a process. And I think it's changed each of us individually, and it's certainly changed our relationship to planning and our relationship to Indigenous knowledge and wisdom. So we are going to continue to listen and learn. But for 3 years, we did hear some messages that resonated from speaker to speaker. And we have a lot of listening and learning left to do. That is not what's behind us. That is our first mandate, is listening and learning. But we did take these messages that we heard over and over and again through the last 3 years. And in 2022, we recommended 2 actions to the board to adopt. We recommended respect for First Nations and First Nations rights, culture, knowledge, and traditions in PIBC accreditation. And we asked for required Indigenous learning for PIBC membership. That's both in the accredited university programs and in the ongoing CPL credits. So the PIBC board unanimously agreed to support those actions, and they provided us with a budget to implement the changes. So throughout 2023, we have and will continue to take the following 2 actions. We have hired an Indigenous consultant to work towards a path to PIBC membership that recognizes traditional knowledge. So that would be outside your current path that probably most people in this room went through, accredited university degree, you know, mentoring, I think some amount of, I didn't go through the current one, guys. So
Yeah, I was
whatever it is,
grandfather rules.
works.
Yes.
We're exploring if there is a path towards PIBC membership, if that's something that would be of any value to Indigenous people, Indigenous planners. And we're really excited to tell you today that Alderhill has been selected through our RFP process. And they're exploring this possibility of path to PIBC membership through an Indigenous advisory committee that they have selected. So they have selected a wide range of Indigenous people working in planning, some RPP, some not RPP, to explore if there is currently any interest. So that's the first step. And their path is really wide open. So we're really looking forward to sharing. They're moving pretty quickly. And we're looking forward to sharing what comes out of that with everybody. The second thing that we'll be undertaking in 2023 is engaging with all the accredited universities in British Columbia about required courses for planning programs that perhaps include Indigenous teachings and certainly awareness of reconciliation and decolonization. So those are our two 2023 mandates. But again, we continue the work to keep learning and listening. And that, again, will remain our #1 mandate of this committee. So over to you.
Great.
Angel.
Thank you, Sarah. And I really do. I'm really excited that, you know, we've taken the time to listen and learn, because the topic of reconciliation is not an easy one. It's a complex one. We get that. And we're not asking everyone to understand everything overnight. And we realize change and understandings take time. And that's the approach we started with. And it's paying off in terms of being patient with ourselves, being patient with those we bring in, and really ensuring we're taking an Indigenous-led approach and understanding to the work we have in front of us. And I really, something that was shared, we met with Alderhill last week as a committee to just discuss next steps, where they're at. And one of the lenses they're taking into consideration in this research we're about to embark on is the reciprocity aspect of this relationship, in terms of, if you're an Indigenous planner working in your community and you're not accredited, and you come, and we're encouraging maybe more Indigenous planners to be accredited, but what is the benefit to that Indigenous planner outside of maybe 7 more initials at the end of your name? No, all jokes aside, but you know, so they're going to take that approach and like, what do we get? What do you get? Not, I hate those kind of dividing terminologies. I'm lacking a better word here, but I just respect that they're looking at it from all angles and really trying to understand how, if this opportunity becomes a reality, is beneficial to all planners, whether you're Indigenous or not. So I really just wanted to highlight that. I really picked up on that when they were sharing with us last week. Great. So that's a little bit about who we are and where we're at here today. And today, moving into this fireside chat, who here knows what a fireside chat is or is an experienced one? Give or take. Basically what it is what you see in front of you. It's an informal conversation that happens with a couple prompt questions, but it's really fluid and flexible in how we approach it. And we thought this was a much better idea to just kind of talk back and forth to hear some conversation instead of being a big, you know, fact-based, point-based talk and head up here with some, like, you know, 400 words on a PowerPoint slide. So not those are good tools, but the conversation here doesn't require them. So here we go. So it's an informal.
We have a bit of those too.
Yes. And so that's what I consider a fireside chat here today. And so I believe you have a question.
Your question, me.
Oh, yes. Okay. So Sarah, if there was only one message for participants to walk away from today, what might that be for you?
Well, we were joking last night when we met before the drinks. You know, we were joking like the colonial approach has had its time and it hasn't really worked. Had it shot, got to move on. You know, if it was a sort of business approach, people wouldn't be using it anymore. We've got fires all over British Columbia, all over Alberta. We got Fort St. John somehow burning down in the middle of May. You know, things aren't going so well. So I think the number one thing that PPRC would ask today is for everybody to be really open for change, because it's really needed. And that's going to be the message of today. Let's change. And we as planners can do so much. And, you know, change is scary to so many people, but as humans, we're set up for change. So like, it really is very possible to change. Every time you're in an organization with bureaucracy and you think, well, we can't do it this way. Well, why not? I mean, all joking aside, but like, we're set up to evolve. That's what we do as human beings. So we were single-celled organisms. And here we're sitting around having a fireside chat together. Surely that means we can change some things about.
Just curious, you guys know about land?
Yes.
Yes.
Are you gonna address that in your conversation at all?
It's-
That's how fun.
Yes, it does. No, today's conversation isn't about land code. Yeah. Yeah. We could get Ken here for that. But not us. We're more talking just in theory of let's change. So we can, yeah. So yeah, just the message for today is let's change. Let's change how we see the world. And we've got David Suzuki here to tell us that the way we see the world shapes the way we treat it. If a mountain is a deity, not a pile of ore. If a river is one of the veins of the land, not potential irrigation water. If a forest is a sacred grove and not timber. If other species are biological kin, not resources. Or if the planet is our mother and not an opportunity, then we will treat each other with greater respect. Thus is the challenge to look at the world from a different perspective. So what we're asking for today is for everybody to participate with an open heart and an open mind, and we'll see what we can explore together in terms of new perspectives. And I think we should only fear not changing. We should only fear the status quo, because we're not heading in a great direction in a lot of areas on the planet at the moment.
Thank you, Sarah. So what do you think there is to fear from the status quo?
This is where we're going to get into a lot of stats. Bear with us. I think we have a lot to fear from the status quo. We have an unwell society. We are not functioning well together. And that has resulted in a global climate crisis that we're not dealing with. And the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, said we are on a highway to climate hell with our foot on the accelerator. We have gross inequity with the world's richest 1%, with more than twice as much wealth as 6.9 billion people combined. And the pandemic has made this worse. According to Oxfam, during the pandemic, global billionaire wealth increased by 3.9 trillion, while global workers' combined earnings fell by 3.7 trillion. That's a direct correlation between where the money is going from and to. We have 50.5 million children under 5 years old acutely nourished. 1 in 10 children worldwide are being forced into child labor and trafficking. Closer to home, we are dealing with drug toxicity, taking the lives of 187 British Columbians every month. In the 2021 homeless count, 8,665 people were counted, but they've done further studies and it's actually closer to 23,000 people. And all of those crises are disproportionately affecting First Nations here in BC and further out to Canada, North America, and throughout the world. 39% of the respondents to the homeless survey identified as Indigenous, while accounting for only 6% of the population. In BC, First Nations people died of drug overdose at 5.3 times the rate of other BC residents. In 2021, Indigenous inmates accounted for 37% of the inmate population, despite being 4.1% of the population. In 2016, Indigenous youth accounted for 46% of youth admitted to the correction system, while making up 8% of the youth population. The UN's Human Development Index is a composite statistic of life expectancy, education, and income per capita. Canada placed 8th in the world. When we apply that to Canada's First Nations, we drop to 63rd of 185 countries. According to the Poverty Institute, Indigenous people experience the highest levels of poverty, with 25% of Indigenous people living in poverty and 40% of Canada's Indigenous children living in poverty. Over 80% of reserves have medium incomes below the poverty line. There are 4,000 missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in Canada. And the Department of Justice advises that Indigenous women are up to 6 times more likely to be murdered than non-Indigenous women. We have over 2,000 unmarked graves of Indigenous children found in Canada, and over 4,000 graves are expected to be found. And that's the legacy and trauma of the residential school system from 1890 to 1996.
Very dismal, but it's very real. I wanted to integrate a slide into today's presentation, but I just ran out of time and quite frankly forgot. I wanted to put a picture up of my grandma standing outside of her house. Little lovely old lady with a smile still on her face, but you look at the living conditions she's standing in front of, and that's all she's known her whole life. And I just wanted to share a little bit of the reality of you know, my grandma's living in a house where the water is running from her kitchen sink through the basement floor. She's got one window that isn't boarded up. You know, she's got 4 of her 10 kids living with her and all the grandkids living with her. And, you know, living off of an income of maybe $1,500 in that whole household entirely. And that's got to change. And that, you know, us as planners really have a pivotal opportunity here to help make that change and implement that change outside of just our profession and how we operate, but generally. And I think, you know, I know that the term reconciliation is often used. That's a big buzzword these days, but really, in the most simplest form, reconciliation, yes, means something different to everyone, but at the end of the day, reconciliation means that you bring something, we bring something, and everyone benefits together. That's the most like basic concept of reconciliation and working together to address things that Sarah just outlined. So thank you for highlighting that, Sarah. Yeah, complex discussions, many avenues we can take as planners to address many of these needs as a Canadian society, but recognizing we can't change everything today. So Sarah, if we had a piece of advice to give our fellow planners today, what might that be?
I think throughout the 3 years of guest speakers and research and a lot of conversations with people, I think one message was clear for everybody, that decolonization and reconciliation is a personal journey. And you have to decolonize ourselves, our ways of thinking, and heal our own traumas in order to support real change in the world. So that's what we'd ask today. We need a total overhaul of the status quo. And Elder Croshaw in the Truth and Reconciliation report says something along those lines. It needs an overhaul of the complete system that we all work within. Nothing short of that will do. And it's not just about reconciliation. It's about saving humans. It's not about saving the planet either. The planet will be fine. It's, you know, we talk about environmentalism. It's not. The planet won't go on without us. We won't go on without it. So, you know, we really need to take that into consideration and bring those really significant changes to the world. And it's got to happen now. I just left a retreat where we talked about so much of these ills of society, the darkness, whatever we call it, global climate crisis, all the things we listed before. You know, it's really external expressions of each individual's egoic traumas that are being played out on a larger stage. So, and that's where we're at. That's how our society is operating at the moment, from a trauma place. So we would ask everybody to undertake their own personal decolonization journey.
Thank you, Sarah. Yes, so I acknowledge the gentleman that brought up the land code in the back. Just carrying on a little bit of, if there was one thing that we as planners can help do outside of our accreditation of becoming certified planners that integrate Indigenous planning into all their planning. We are policy movers and shakers in this room. And it's been known that since Canada has been Canada, that government has been responsible for enforcing legislation such as the Indian Act, ways of colonial policy that are responsible for these despairs we hear today. And so I think just adding on to what Sarah has shared, as if there's one piece of advice, pardon me for a sniffle, is to planners, what can we do is support policy change that break down these current systems of colonization. If you can influence policy that's more inclusive of Indigenous participation, whether you're a decision maker or an advocate or a technician, and for giving fact-based information to the decision makers, we all have a role here and it can be done. And so back to the land code, that's a really great example. I'm not sure if everyone here is familiar with the land code. What it is in a nutshell is basically it takes provisions out of the Indian Act around the land management of Indian reserves and gives that responsibility back to the community to create their own land codes on how they want to manage their own lands. And that's an example of how we as planners can work with communities to change policy, to change how communities are being run, and they're being run by their own people. So that's my piece of advice on what we can do as planners. Back to our conversation here, Sarah. How do you think the topics we've talked about relate back to the decolonization and planning practice?
Yeah, I mean, they're pretty big topics, right? Trauma, what does that have to do with planning? You know, it's the way our world is structured. And so it's the way that planning practice is structured. It's rooted in a broken system that's based on colonialism. And what we've learned, and you know, what's probably pretty obvious, is that the legacy of trauma, or the legacy of colonialism, is trauma. And maybe another way to say that is that the colonial approach, and so ultimately all of our systems and processes, they're based on what results from trauma. And it's not a good way to function. You know, we've heard from Resmaa Menakem, Nikki Sanchez, Gabor Mate, and many others that talk about the roots of colonialism are founded in trauma. And in Gabor Mate's Wisdom of Trauma, he speaks to Resmaa Menakem. And Resmaa speaks about somatic abolitionism and healing racialized trauma. And he speaks about the effects of trauma in our culture from 100 years ago, from 1,000 years ago, from elite white bodies that traumatized poor white bodies to those bringing that trauma to Africa, and then ultimately to the brutality of slavery and the genocide of First Nations people throughout North America. And Resmaa speaks about the generational effects on Black and Indigenous bodies today from 250 years of rape and torture in North America. And that trauma is now shaping our culture. It's shaping our systems, our government, and it's shaping the way that we all see the world. And that's both from an individual's perspective and from society as a whole. So in other words, collective trauma is a systemic cancer that we currently allow to determine how we operate, how we interact with each other in the environment, and how we shape and plan our world. And it's the difference between seeing ourselves as part of the earth, as David Suzuki says, and seeing the earth as a commodity that's there to be brokered by us. Nikki Sanchez, in a TEDx talk, speaks about this collective colonial trauma. She says it's the violence of the history of colonization that negatively shapes us. She reminds us of the outcomes of this trauma-guided system, that up to 90% of some nations were wiped out by smallpox. She reminds us of the missing Indigenous women and girls, of the 150,000 children kidnapped from their families by the state. She reminds us that the abuse in residential schools has an ongoing legacy of trauma. And she reminds us that these atrocities are ongoing, that First Nations babies continue to be apprehended by the state and taken away from their families, and that there are more children today in the care of the state than during the height of the residential school system. And so we can see that the ongoing harm of the colonial system continues. Nikki Sanchez identifies our ongoing role, the colonial ongoing role, as historic bystander trauma. So we all suffer from it. And it's sort of what allows us all to allow the systems to continue as they are, getting worse and worse and worse. And she also tells us that from the settlers' point of view, it's not our fault, but it is our responsibility. And we do need to do things to change it. If we don't, the systems will continue to cause harm, and they'll continue to destroy our planet and our communities. So ending that cycle is, I think, what we all need to focus on. And Gabor reminds us that the legacy of colonialism is an unwell society. And we saw that before in the points of all the things that are going on in the world right now, that trauma is resulting in. He says that so much of what we call abnormality in this culture is actually a normal response to an abnormal culture. The abnormality does not reside in the pathology of individuals, but in the very culture that drives people into suffering and dysfunction. So there's sort of a disconnection and a sense of hopelessness that we have in our communities. And I think it's really concentrated in somewhere like the downtown east side, but I think it's everywhere. I think when you go there, it's inundated, but we're all living it to some extent or another. It's just really there. In a lot of trauma in the downtown east side. So we're functioning in an unwell society, each of us to the best of our ability.
Thank you for that. Thank you for sharing, Sarah. And absolutely, I'm going to be very blunt here and just say that the upholding of colonial and racist ways are very costly, not well to our society, to our communities. And we really do need to move towards a restructuring a system so that there's simply a fair chance for everybody. So my next question for you, Sarah, is what can planners here do today?
We touched on reconciliation and decolonization being personal journeys. I think what we want to get across is that, you know, throughout the world, there's different traditional teachings, but they're all rooted in a sense of community, a sense of connection to the earth, and a sense of connection to a spirit or the universe, or just being all together here on this planet, some kind of connection to each other. So we as planners, we really need to decolonize ourselves, and then we can decolonize our institutions and the ways that we practice planning. As I shared above, David Suzuki says the way we see the world shapes how we treat it. So we have to change the way that we see the world. And we'll do that through our deep personal journeys. As planners, we can play a significant role shaping the future, which Angel's touched on. We're so embedded in policy and planning for the future. We can have such an impact. So if we take some of these central tenets of traditional wisdom and take them from where you want, take them from your own family histories, from wherever you can get them, you know, a sense of interconnectedness. We all just want to connect with each other. That's all humans want to do, to be connected. And again, you'll see that on the downtown east side with such a disconnection from each other. A sense of balance and a respect for the natural world. So if we started to plan with these priorities, you know, we can change the way that we see the world, and then we'll change the way that we treat it.
Thank you.
Yes.
Keep on talking and the
We're way
we're
behind.
talking about decolonizing.
Mhm.
I understand what colonizing is something all in school.
Mhm.
But how do you define decolonizing? Like, if I were to go on a personal journey to colonize myself, who's really, I'm a white woman with long hair and
Yeah.
you know, I can't. And I looked at that kind of stuff. So how would you define that if you're going to Google planners that all over the world? How do you decolonize this?
Making space for other ways of doing outside of the colonial ways. Like in terms of government right now, it's governance big time. That shared decision making, shared planning, shared collaboration. Right now it's Canadian policy, our way or no way, and that is a colonization. So to decolonize is break those systems down, start over, work together, and build a system up together.
Yeah, I mean, an example of that is that we don't have to have this rigid path to RPP, that we're not necessarily doing it the right way. So you need this university education, you need this mentoring by somebody else who has the same university education. By finding a path that doesn't require those, but that respects traditional knowledge, that, you know, you have people working on nations who are planners, but they haven't been to university. They do everything. They are wearing every single different hat, but they can't be a planner, an RPP planner. So if there was a way to do that, that's an example of decolonization. It doesn't have to be this way. There are, yeah, yeah. And we have had countless speakers share with us times where traditional wisdom has said what science is just telling us now, like, and they've been saying it for hundreds of years and no one's listening, because it's, you know, that's the conversation about respect for traditional knowledge, like respect it. It knows what it's talking about.
That's why I brought up landfill, is because
Yeah.
when you pass a landfill, irrigation gets to develop their own laws.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's not just land, it's finance.
Absolutely.
So
That's a,
it's something that I think the PIBC look at to incorporate for an RPP, because the work I do at my nation is nothing like what you guys do.
yes,
Absolutely no comparison,
yes,
other than policy development.
yeah,
But our policies are guided by the nation.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Is there a question? on that?
Thank you.
I think what you're talking about, we put it simply, is the inclusion. How do you decolonize? Throw away the old system.
Yes,
Okay, just throw it away because it's hurt everybody in Canada.
yes,
And so it's lost, it's no good. Do you keep rotten fruit or rotten meat?
yeah,
No, well, that's what we've been doing.
yes,
So we gotta throw that, and for me, I'm an elder from Swazi First Nation. And I say, I sit here proudly listening to you.
Thank you.
I feel proud that it's the inclusion of all of us. It's the inclusion of all of the First Nations in the Métis, but here in BC, we're First Nations. This is BC First Nation. Okay, and it's Canada First Nation. Once you get that in your head, and then you'll be able to listen to all of the knowledge that we have and add, and no one ever use it. But that was what the Indian Act did. It kept us out of each and every participation. So we've got to believe in everything. And for me as an elder, whenever the government is standing up there talking about First Nations, well, I want our leaders standing there to say what they are thinking. We don't have to be represented anymore.
Hmm.
We don't need representation because they screwed it all up.
Yeah.
That's what they do. So when anybody talks about us, then we've got to have someone there and say what we really think. Because all those nice words, you don't know what they mean. You need us to speak.
Yep.
In a kind way, because nobody knows how to be kind. And the other thing about the climate, we feel all of these things happening. Well, the earth is trying to get rid of us all because we're not treating it right. And so that's what it's doing. We dug up everything on the earth. Pretty soon we're just gonna fall in that big hole. So the earth is trying to get rid of us because we have not treated it right, and it sure is in our indigenous ways. We know our ancestors knew how to parent, they knew how to do everything. We don't need all of that. Why do we have that now? Because it shut us all down. Okay, they shut us all down.
okay,
Our ancestors knew how to do everything, and they did everything by the stars, the moon, everything. We knew how to do everything. And no one listened. Now you have to listen because we've read it all. So now you've got to take all of the advice that we're giving, and I'm thinking it is going to change in a lot of our people at our speaking, and I'm one of them. Because I can speak in public because I think you need to learn everything, and I will be speaking tomorrow.
no,
So
I should probably just move over and you can come up here and finish the presentation.
It's amazing. Thank you, Masicho Ruth. That means a lot to myself and Sarah. I'm sure I'm speaking on her behalf, but
I mean,
it's
it's
a real
exactly
team
what
effort and-
it was what we were joking about last night. If it was like some business model, nobody would use it anymore. It hasn't worked. Move on.
yes.
Throw it away. Rotten fruit. That sounds
Thank
better.
you. Great. Yes. So and I do, as a practicing planner, see the shift that's needed. And I mean, look at the room here today. We all want to learn from one another and figure out a solution to how we move forward together. And it's really inspiring to see the room full, some standing room, and I've definitely appreciate it. And I know often right now, some of the approaches we take, our ambitions can often exceed trust. And that's just where we really need to just stop and take a moment and work together to learn how we move forward together in a respectful way. And so great start to our conversation. And so getting to near the end here of my questions for Sarah. My question is, how will the planning practices for reconciliation committee help guide some of this work we're discussing here today?
So we're going to be putting together like an annual learning structure for PIBC membership. We're going to be using some current tools that we know about right now. We're hopefully going to find some new tools to use at our disposal. This is not going to be some rigid, you have to do these 5 things and we'll all be saved, but we are going to kind of try to start taking you on our journey with us somehow. So what we're currently looking at, and we're going to be meeting in the fall to really start to put together the plan. We're going to be meeting in person. We're going to be using webinars that are going to be run through the PIBC Continued Learning. We're going to be doing every quarter. We'll have an article in the Planning West magazine, and our first one was this spring. So it was just an overview. You guys don't need to read it because you heard it here today. We'll be working with the accredited institutions for Indigenous learning requirements for all upcoming planning students. And I mentioned we're going to be meeting in person. Angel and I have had some really interesting talks. We hope that the board's going to approve our request to meet in person and come up.
He's got 2 days left, so we'll be talking. Oh wait, I've only got 2 days left too.
And I don't want to share it, but it's really exciting. And Angel has some brilliant ideas of sort of taking the PPRC out onto land. Anyways, I won't get into it because they might not let us do it, but we're really excited about it. And we would hope maybe to videotape and share the journey with you. So that's what we're hoping to do. We're hoping, we're coming here today and you guys are probably all like thinking you were going to get a list of practical advice on how to be planners, and you're not from this group. I just got to tell you that we're on a decolonization journey, not here's a list, go do this. It's never going to come from us. You can go to some other websites for those lists. So we're going to change, we're going to decolonize PIBC. And and we have I also have to mention, we have the full support of the board. So the board votes and gives us absolutely everything asked for and then some more. So we have a lot of support.
Tara?
Yeah, so one of my favorite books of all time is a book called Ceremony by Leslie Marmon Silko. And our hero is trying to figure out where the evil comes from. Does the evil come from whiteness or race, or does the evil come from greed, or does it come from money? But when I listen to you talk about largely racist and body oriented, I think that the major ways that all of us are sort of subject to colonization is our financial system and our assumptions around efficiency. And these are really deep. That's the whole profession of planning, is about doing things without spending too much money on it. And I started to think about, in that sense, I call it like a decolonized planning. Is that one where we decide so we don't care about money. And so it's a really interesting territory, so I think that. For me, thinking about colonizing and decolonizing is for everybody, it's not about race, essentially.
Absolutely.
About race, it's about how our financial systems direct us. So I just wanted to raise that, because I think that the financial element is really important, and very everything.
I do too. And in another speech we gave for PPRC, we talked about capitalism. And we talked about like, my mind gets a little bit blown when I think we're this ball of dirt spinning through the universe being held by another ball of fire. And we think we're allowed to buy a piece of that dirt, that somehow that belongs to us. That's capitalism, right? That's the start of capitalism, is purchasing land, owning land. How do you own land? But you know what? I think there's hope there too. There's being feudalism. There's been all kinds of different economic systems that are set in place. It's not always going to be capitalism. So we don't know what's next, but it's not always going to be this way. And that's part of decolonization, is a new system. Who knows what it is? It's not happening tomorrow. Because we got to get going, because not going, but Angel is going to talk to us a lot about much more interesting things than I have.
No, I think it's kind of just coming out naturally in our conversation here. So
It is.
have at her.
This is we gotta get to Angel. She's got a lot to tell us. She teaches me every time I talk to her. So Angel, could you say a few words for these folks about the difference between indigenizing versus decolonizing?
Yes and no. I don't have all the answers, but like I'd said earlier, it's just decolonizing these kind of one system, one approach. And I think we kind of talk about what we think decolonizing is. In terms of indigenizing, to me, that means letting communities have self-determination and make their own decisions and do things in their own ways and create the space so that maybe Canadian systems and Indigenous systems could complement or concur together. But it's just creating the space to have more than one way of doing, and just allowing communities to really uphold their laws, traditions, and customs in a way that they see fit. That's indigenizing, creating that space. You don't have to question it. You don't need to know everything. Don't need to know why, if it's right or if it's wrong. It works for us, and just respect that. And that to me is they're two different systems. One is just breaking down this like dominating type of approach, where indigenizing is more holistic. It's I'm not above you or below you, I'm beside you. And that's my short answer. I won't get too into it.
We talk about this quite a lot, and we talked about it yesterday, but you find yourself walking both worlds, indigenizing and decolonization at the same time. And I know that it's a very difficult balance for you to achieve. Can you share with us some comments about the uniqueness and the challenges of balancing these two worlds that you find yourself in?
Yes, absolutely. It is interesting times. I'm going to actually be doing a talk. I've been thinking about this question, and I'm doing a talk for something else on Indigenous Day, and trying to really like grasp, how am I going to approach this topic? Do I go back through history? Do I talk about present day? Do I talk about the social changes, the political changes, the religious changes? Like, I don't know where on the spectrum I'm going to talk about what it's like to be Indigenous. But I came to like scoping this so that it's manageable and how my thought process works. And to me, I quoted my talk, it's being an Indigenous woman in a new millennium. And it's carrying my past, my teachings, my laws, my traditions with me, but also looking really forward to ensuring that we are part of the economy, we are part of society, we are part of decision-making and lawmaking. And I also realize that's like the juxtaposition of like, I'm saying break down policies, but let's have policies in place. And so it's a fine line of trying to balance like working under Canadian systems, but also bringing forward my teachings and beliefs and integrating those into another system. And so that's what I find is most challenging, of not only just because of who I am by blood, but who I am by ancestral inherent right, and trying to fit that into a system that I didn't create at times. And it's often smashing my head against the wall, like, what the heck? And so instead of fighting, I'm not a fighter, I'm a lover, big time. And I love hugs too. But I'm done with fighting. Fighting has got us nowhere, but in this circular battle of nobody winning, nobody moving forward, and just creating a divide. And so I don't often try to think of me being either half white or half brown, or my systems and your systems. What I'm trying to do now is, okay, I'm done fighting. This is not working. We know that this business model is out the window. And so I'm finding I'm really taking advantage of spaces like when the federal government opened up or created the new Impact Assessment Act, which is directly linked to my work in the administration of projects that link to land, that link directly to my identity. And so I, getting crazy here, all the hand talking. If you don't know Dawn Burnstick's 5 things Native women do when they laugh, look it up. It's really great. One of them is like being a big hand talker, but our Indigenous women, First Nation women. But where I'm seeing my space in bringing, I guess, the two worlds together is really using my voice from an Indigenous perspective to influence legislative change that will eventually trickle down to the actual policies that are making the change happen. And so being in this pivotal space of being Indigenous and being a colonizer myself as well because of my blood, I'm just taking an approach of trying to take a more collaborative approach. And I'm finding it's giving me peace of mind, and I can sleep at night, but it's really taking a collaborative approach. And I find that's how I'm balancing both worlds. It's just using my voice to make the changes in like the Impact Assessment Act, which now has created provisions in the act to consider the impacts of major projects on a community's ability to practice their culture, for example. And so I'm creating tools that is going to inform that legislation. And so that's how I'm balancing the best of both worlds. Is things need to change. And I keep saying that. I don't mean to sound like a broken wheel here, but that's what it's taken, is the shift and the energy and the efforts of trying to bring my views into that, but in a way that speaks Canadian talk so people get it. There's ways you can do that. There's ways that you can't. And that's just that respect aspect of respecting two systems at a time sometimes.
We'll get your superhero cape after.
I
know because I talk to you that you often find yourself as the only Indigenous person at the table. And I know that that's a lot of pressure for you, and that you're asked to resolve decolonization efforts for the colonizers quite a bit. So what advice would you have for planners who are working with Indigenous people and groups who are working towards decolonization and not putting the burden onto Indigenous people to do the decolonization?
Yeah, I am often the only, so I was just processing, listening, hearing, feeling. I am usually often the only Indigenous person in the room on like the Indigenous planning or planning practices for our conciliation committee. I still am the only Indigenous person. I was actually the only Indigenous person on our PIBC board. I sit on the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada. Actually, that's an Indigenous full board, which is amazing. And I sit on the Association of Consulting Engineering Companies of Canada's board of directors, and I'm only one of 5. There's a 20-person board. There's only 5 women on it, and of those 5 women, I'm the only Indigenous person. But I believe, often that's going to change. That's, I guess, I'm seeing the shift of the value of really taking collaborative approaches to making change. But I'm starting to see more and more Indigenous people get involved, because we realize, like I was saying about my story of I'm tired of fighting and tired of, this battle. And it's like, instead of sitting across from the table with you, I want to sit with you at the table. instead of always pushing and, and so that is often the experience today. And so if you're on corporate boards or you have a board in your organization, I just recommend making space for an Indigenous perspective on that board, whether they're certified or not. And, it's just, I guess in closing, I heard this speak. I was actually on a panel at Canada 2020 in Ottawa last week. And this is from Dr. Alika Lafontaine. And it just really resided with me into this question is just, it can be really lonely being the only Indigenous person at a decision-making table. And it's exhausting having to explain things over and over, which people should understand as humans. So I'll leave it at that for that comment.
Okay.
Thank you. Ruth?
Think about the colonization, because in order, what you're doing is colonization, don't worry about that, but because what it is what I think in our nation too, is that I'm not trying to participate, I'm trying to bring people to me, to let them know how things can work better. And so if you just put all of that into what you're doing, then that's the change. You don't need to worry about the decolonization. And that one thing I'm going to say about the decolonization is intergenerational trauma. Well, guess what? Everyone in this room, you're all in trauma too, because you've been put into the position, or you put that in active and you all agreed with it. Well, you didn't know what it was, and you didn't get to deal with it, and so you didn't either. So you're all in the same boat as we are. And that's what I say, I bring people to it so that they can understand who we are and what we do, and that's what they need, because they'll be right next to us, and we work really hard. That's the big part of planners too, is that we have educated our planners. They're part of our family, and we do a lot for all of our members. We have committees and everything, so we do all of that work, and I can tell them, oh, I wish we could do that. So in the municipalities, they don't have any say either. So we're far ahead. So if you listen to us, then you're going to be far ahead too.
Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing.
Yeah, thanks. And that's the trauma that's made the unwell society that Gabor and Resma and Nikki Sanchez talk about. So, okay, Angel is actually the busiest lady around. She's flying to Ottawa, she's going to Dublin, she's going all over the place. And I had a whole list of things she does, but she's gone through it. So I'm going to skip to the question. So you're kind of paring down some of the things that you're involved in, and yet you very wonderfully continue to be committed to working with PPRC. Can you share a few words about what this work means to you?
Oh, yeah, I might get emotional here. I don't even know if I can do this right now. This work is just inspiring at the end of the day, because it's really, we're feeling heard, and you're in this room obviously because you care and you want to hear and listen and learn about how we can move forward together. And that is just been really rewarding, and just the support of our board to sorry, it's just really, it's emotional because it's these are happy tears, by the way. It's just, it just makes me think of my grandma and all that she fought for, and my mom. And this is the fights they've been fighting for, is to make the changes, such as having a planning organization create a special committee and create that space finally after all these battles of years. And for me to be that person at this table to kind of be like breaking this cycle of out with, business as usual approach is just really encouraging at the end of the day. So that's what it's meant to me, is I'm part of the change. I'm seeing the change, and it's here in front of us. So it's been really rewarding that way. I'm okay. Thank you.
I think we should end on that note. We have a couple more questions, but we're not probably going to get to them. So we can vote to keep going, or we can, it's.
Yeah, I
it's
think
the
we
end
can
of the
open it.
session.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Already that happened so quickly in these
Well,
conversations.
I have more questions for you.
Oh, okay.
Remember, we're all getting it. So, I mean, we'll keep going. If people want to leave, then that's okay. We understand it's lunch and things, but we have some good questions here, so I do want to get to them. Angel and I met for lunch in April, and she had just finished hosting the conference, which I kept hearing from everybody in Vancouver that it was amazing. And we talked about the fact that, you know, there's a lot of shared wisdom amongst traditional teachings all around the world, from, you know, Australian, or from Australia, from New Zealand, from Celtic and South American. And there's so many of those rooted in interconnectedness and balance and all the things that we've already talked about today. And I think that we both agreed, you know, it's not a coincidence, but it's indicative that the teachings are rooted in a connection, in a really authentic connection to the land and to each other, and also to spirit, if you have a practice of that at all. And so my question is, if Indigenous planners were given the space to indigenize, what impact do you think that that planning could have on the practice and the profession?
A positive one. I like the most simple answer.
There we go. Let's do it.
That's it. Very straightforward.
Yeah.
Nothing but positivity, and we can only go forward from here.
Yeah, and I think the point that we were sharing at the lunch was, how did all these different cultures come up with their own knowledge that's all based on the same things? It's because that's where we all need to be. That's where the human interconnectedness with life and form and everything comes from. This is a bit of a long going question. We sort of talked about this intertwining of all these different cultures, and so much of what we've learned together, and then things that I have from my own culture and everything, and how it all intertwines. And so I want to share a little bit about this intertwining. I read a lot of John O'Donoghue, who's an Irish poet, and he writes about a lot of things, about longing and belonging and all these things. But he writes about how modern cultures' deep hunger to belong, or deep hunger for connection, and the fragmentation of society that we see right now, that it turns us to consumerism, capitalism, and then results in isolation from each other. And then I did Kathy Camilleri's reconciliation course, which is the village structure. And in it, she talks about how in the village structure, everybody belonged, everybody had a place, everybody had a sense of purpose. And I think that's what John O'Donoghue was saying is lost, that the sense of purpose, the sense of belonging that we all want, it's gone. Gabor Mate then speaks about this unwell society that's created, that we're all trying to just function in. And they're pointing out that the current structure of society, it doesn't facilitate that connection, which humans are here, we're here to connect. And so we're all trying to find meaning in consumerism, in capitalism, rather than in community. And for me, this evoked the saying, this Indigenous saying, when the last tree is cut, the last fish is eaten, and the last stream poisoned, you will realize that you cannot eat money. And then at the 2021 keynote speech, Jesse Hemphill said to us, if there is one thing we can do to support reconciliation and indigenizing, it's just to get out of the way. Does that resonate with you?
Yes. Yes. It just comes back down to just the simple messages of around getting out of the way. It's, you know, we don't need help. We know how we operate. We want support. In my line of work, for example, right now, government processes and policies right now hinder us the ability to access capital, to build our own projects, to generate our own communities, and therefore fund all our own community programming. I'm like, what we're asking, we're not asking you to fund it, we're asking you to create levers that allow us access so we can borrow our own money and pay it back and build these projects. But if you don't open those doors, you're not helping us. And so we don't need the help, we just need support in scenarios like that. There's these barriers that are there, that you've got these brilliant ideas and vision and ideas on how to get there, but there's these barriers. And so if we can break those barriers down and move some things out of the way, I think, yes, that's how things are going to move forward.
Okay, last question.
Okay.
What would be your message for planners here today?
Be gentle with yourselves. That's really all I've got to say in terms of, working with your Indigenous counterpart or Indigenous colleagues, friends, family. These topics aren't easy. Change isn't going to happen overnight. And if you don't, I know, like we were saying, when we started the PPRC, if we didn't have a checklist of 10 things by the end of the 3 years, that didn't mean we failed.
Yeah.
It just meant that, we're taking our time and doing this right. And so things take time. And that's why I say be gentle with yourself. And if you don't get it right the first time, that's okay.
Yeah, that is a good point. We really have approached it differently. And there's been a lot of discomfort with that. Be uncomfortable and continue to be uncomfortable. We've lost members. That's been uncomfortable. It's been an uncomfortable ride. Be uncomfortable. If you're uncomfortable, you're going somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Well, I think just in light of time and hunger, I'm here around the conference. You've got my profile on the app and stuff. I'm open to any comments or questions. I know we're all hungry, but feel free to reach out to me. I'm going to network around after I change out of this dress. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. Great. Enjoy your lunch.
Thank you.
I can move this out of my way.
Thanks to the board.
Yes, thank you. That's okay.